What if the person you were told to fear was the very person destined to love you forever? What if the monster everyone warned you about was not a monster at all, but a lonely man waiting centuries for someone to finally see the truth hidden behind his walls? And what if one decision, one impossible marriage, could change not only 2 lives, but the fate of an entire kingdom? This is not a story about perfect people. It is a story about scars, secrets, misunderstandings, and a love that refused to die. Because when Persephone agreed to marry Adam, she thought she was stepping into a prison. She never imagined she was stepping into the greatest love story of her life. Part 1. Long before Adam and Persephone ever met, stories about Adam had already spread across the land. Some called him cold, some called him dangerous. Others whispered that he preferred isolation because he could not bear the company of others. No matter which version people believed, they all agreed on one thing. Adam was not the kind of man a young woman dreamed of marrying. The truth, however, was much more complicated. Adam lived surrounded by wealth, power, and influence, yet none of those things brought him happiness. He owned more land than most people could imagine. He could command respect without saying a word. He could walk into any room and silence every conversation. But when the doors closed and the world disappeared, he was alone. Very alone. The people around him respected him, they feared him, they obeyed him, but almost nobody truly knew him. Years of disappointment had taught Adam a simple lesson: trust nobody. Every person who entered his life seemed to want something. Some wanted his title, some wanted his fortune, some wanted the advantages that came with standing beside him. Very few cared about the man hidden beneath the reputation. After enough betrayals, Adam stopped trying. He stopped hoping. He stopped believing that anyone would ever stay. Meanwhile, far away from Adam's isolated world, Persephone lived a very different life. She was kind-hearted, curious, and endlessly hopeful. Unlike many people around her, she still believed that goodness existed in unexpected places. She loved stories. She loved possibilities. She loved imagining futures that seemed impossible. Yet even Persephone carried hidden fears. She worried about disappointing her family. She worried about making the wrong choices. Most of all, she worried that life would pass her by before she discovered where she truly belonged. She never expected that her future would arrive in the form of a marriage proposal, and she certainly never expected that proposal to come from Adam. When the news first arrived, confusion spread through her household. People could hardly believe it. Adam? The Adam? The wealthy, mysterious man who rarely appeared in public? The man surrounded by rumors? The man nobody seemed able to understand? Questions filled every conversation. Why her? Why now? What could Adam possibly want? Even Persephone could not understand it. She had never imagined herself connected to someone like him. The more she heard about Adam, the more uncertain she became. Some stories described him as distant, others described him as cruel. A few claimed he preferred being alone because he simply did not care about anyone. The stories grew darker each time they were repeated, and yet something about them felt incomplete, because every rumor seemed to describe Adam from a distance. Nobody talked about who he truly was. Nobody talked about what he felt. Nobody talked about why he had become the man everyone feared. As the proposal remained on the table, Persephone found herself standing between fear and curiosity. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately. Part of her wanted to run in the opposite direction. But another part of her wanted answers. She wanted the truth. She wanted to know whether the man hidden beneath the stories was really as terrible as everyone claimed. The decision became even more difficult when her family became involved. Some believed the marriage would secure her future. Others worried she would spend her life trapped beside a stranger. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had advice, but nobody could make the choice for her. Only Persephone could decide. Night after night, she lay awake thinking about the future. Would she regret saying yes? Would she regret saying no? Would this marriage destroy her happiness? Or could it become the beginning of something she could not yet imagine? The uncertainty followed her everywhere. Meanwhile, Adam waited. Unlike the rumors suggested, he was not indifferent. In fact, he was more nervous than he had been in years, because despite everything he had achieved, there was one thing he had never learned how to do: hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope created expectations. Hope led to disappointment. Yet for the first time in a long time, Adam found himself hoping. Not that Persephone would love him, not that she would understand him, not even that she would stay. He simply hoped she would give him one chance, one opportunity, to prove that he was more than the stories people told. Days passed, then weeks. The answer still had not come. Every passing moment seemed to stretch forever. Neither of them realized it yet, but their lives had already begun changing, because destiny was moving quietly behind the scenes, drawing two lonely hearts toward each other, preparing them for a journey neither of them could predict. And when Persephone finally made her decision, everything would change. But the real question was not whether she would accept Adam's proposal. The real question was this: what would happen when she finally met the man everyone had warned her about? The day Persephone finally met Adam, she expected to feel certainty. She expected to know immediately whether the stories were true. She expected to look into his eyes and see either a monster or a gentleman. Instead, she found something much more confusing. She found a man who looked just as uncomfortable as she felt. The journey to Adam's estate felt longer than it should have. Every mile seemed to carry her farther away from the life she had always known. The familiar roads disappeared behind her. The voices of her family became distant memories. Even the landscape seemed different. By the time she arrived, her stomach was filled with nerves. This was it. There would be no turning back now. The enormous estate stood before her like something from a dream. It was beautiful, impressive, and strangely quiet, the kind of place that should have felt full of life, yet somehow felt empty, as if it had been waiting for someone, waiting for years. And then she saw him, Adam, standing near the entrance, watching her arrival. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Neither seemed to know what to say. This was supposed to be the beginning of their future, yet they felt like complete strangers. Because they were. Persephone studied him carefully. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frightening either. His expression seemed guarded, careful, like someone who had spent years protecting himself from disappointment. Adam looked at her and immediately realized something. She was afraid. Not terrified, not panicked, but afraid. And he hated it. Not because it offended him, because he understood exactly why. The world had spent years turning him into a villain. How could he blame her for believing what everyone else believed? "Thank you for coming," he finally said. The words were simple, yet something about them surprised Persephone. There was no arrogance, no command, no expectation, just gratitude, as if he genuinely wasn't sure she would come. Their first conversations were awkward, painfully awkward. Every question seemed to lead to silence. Every silence seemed to last forever. Both of them searched for the right words. Neither could find them. Persephone noticed that Adam rarely spoke about himself. Whenever conversation moved too close to personal subjects, he quietly redirected it elsewhere. At first, she assumed he was hiding something. Then, she began to suspect something else. Maybe he simply wasn't used to talking about himself. Maybe nobody had ever cared enough to ask. The first few days passed slowly, very slowly. Adam remained polite, respectful, distant, almost too distant. He gave Persephone space. He never pressured her, never demanded anything, never acted like she owed him affection simply because they were married. Yet that created a different problem. The distance between them remained. Neither knew how to cross it. One evening, during dinner, Persephone finally asked the question she had been carrying since her arrival. "Why me?" Adam looked surprised. "Why did you choose me?" she continued.
The question hung in the air. For a moment, Adam seemed unsure how to answer. Then he spoke honestly. Because everyone else only saw my title. Persephone blinked. Adam stared down at his plate before continuing. They saw my wealth, my influence, my name, but when I heard people speak about you, they never talked about any of those things. They talked about your kindness. The answer caught her completely off guard, because it sounded genuine, painfully genuine. For the first time, she glimpsed the loneliness hiding beneath Adam's reputation, and suddenly the stories she had heard began to feel incomplete. Over the following weeks, Persephone started noticing things nobody had mentioned. She noticed how servants seemed genuinely loyal to Adam, not fearful, loyal. She noticed how carefully he treated everyone around him. She noticed how quietly he solved problems without seeking praise. She noticed how often he put other people's needs before his own. None of it matched the monster she had been warned about, but something else worried her. Adam seemed determined to keep everyone at a distance, even her. Whenever conversations became personal, he withdrew. Whenever emotions appeared, he built another wall. Whenever happiness seemed possible, he found a reason to expect disappointment. It was as if he believed losing people was inevitable, as if he had already accepted that everyone eventually leaves. One rainy afternoon, Persephone found him alone in the library. The massive room was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Adam sat reading, completely unaware she was watching. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He didn't look intimidating. He looked lonely. The realization hit her harder than she expected, because loneliness recognized loneliness, and suddenly she understood something important. Adam wasn't pushing people away because he disliked them. He pushed people away because he feared what would happen if they stayed. That evening, Persephone couldn't stop thinking about Adam. The stories had prepared her for cruelty. They had prepared her for coldness. They had prepared her for arrogance. Nobody had prepared her for sadness. Nobody had prepared her for a man who seemed convinced he didn't deserve happiness. Days later, another crack appeared in Adam's carefully constructed walls. Persephone mentioned missing her family. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Instantly, she regretted it. She expected Adam to ignore the comment. Instead, he quietly listened, really listened. Then he arranged a visit. No argument, no hesitation, no complaint. He simply wanted her to see the people she loved. The gesture stunned her, because it would have been easier for him to say no, easier to keep her close, easier to prioritize himself, yet he didn't. For perhaps the first time since arriving, Persephone found herself questioning everything she believed about Adam. Maybe he wasn't the villain. Maybe he wasn't the problem at all. Maybe the real tragedy was that nobody had bothered to understand him. As their relationship slowly changed, Adam noticed something too. Persephone wasn't treating him like everyone else. She wasn't impressed by his wealth. She wasn't intimidated by his reputation. She wasn't trying to gain anything from him. She simply wanted to know him, the real him. And that terrified him more than anything, because if Persephone truly saw who he was, she might discover he wasn't worth loving. One evening, as they walked through the estate gardens, Persephone laughed at something unexpectedly ridiculous Adam said. The sound froze him in place. For a moment, he simply